The numbers on the monitor above my son's bed kept changing, and I kept watching them the way you watch something you don't fully understand but know matters. The nurse had explained what each one meant about 40 minutes earlier. I'd nodded like I was following along. I hadn't been following along. My son was 34 years old. He coached his daughter's soccer team on Saturday mornings. He grilled on Sundays and burned the chicken every single time and laughed about it every single time. He was not supposed to be lying in a hospital bed with wires taped to his chest and a cardiologist somewhere down the hall reviewing his scans. I was 63. I had spent 34 years building things with my hands, houses, additions, decks, a few commercial spaces toward the end. My back knew about every one of them. I had retired 8 months ago, and my wife had told me that was the best decision I'd ever made, and I had believed her the way you believe someone after 31 years of marriage. The way you stop questioning certain things because the foundation seems solid and you've got no reason to go looking for cracks. My granddaughter was asleep in the chair next to me, her head tipped sideways against my arm, her sneakers barely reaching the edge of the seat. She was 8. She had been in the car with her father when he pulled over on the highway because his heart started doing something it wasn't supposed to do. She had called 911 herself. The dispatcher had told me later that she'd been calm and clear and given them the exact mile marker, 8 years old. I had my hand resting on her knee so she'd know I was still there if she woke up. My phone was on the other armrest, face down, because the cardiologist had said he'd call the room phone with updates and I didn't want distractions. My daughter-in-law was 40 minutes away, stuck in traffic that had materialized out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon. My wife had said she was on her way when I called her from the ambulance bay 3 hours ago. 3 hours. I picked up my phone to check if she'd sent an update about where she was. There were 4 notifications. 3 were news alerts I hadn't asked for and kept meaning to turn off. The 4th was from our bank, a transaction notification. I had set those up years ago at my wife's suggestion. Actually, she said it was smart to know what was moving in and out. I opened it without thinking much about it. Wire transfer, $47,200. Initiated 41 minutes ago from our joint savings account. Transferred to an external account I didn't recognize. I read it twice, then a third time. The numbers on my son's monitor kept doing what they were doing. My granddaughter made a small sound in her sleep and shifted her weight into my arm. I told myself there was an explanation. I told myself my wife had called me about this and I'd missed it in the chaos. I told myself the bank had made an error. I told myself a lot of things in about 15 seconds. Then I opened our account app. The savings account had held $63,000. It held $15,800 now. The wire wasn't the only transaction. There had been 2 others earlier that afternoon, one at 1:47 p.m., one at 2:15 p.m., moving money in smaller amounts to the same unknown account. I had been in the ambulance bay at 1:47 p.m. I had been talking to the cardiologist at 2:15 p.m. My granddaughter stirred. "Grandpa," she said, not quite awake. "I'm here," I said. My voice came out steady. "I don't know how. Is Dad going to be okay? The doctors are taking good care of him." She settled back into my arm. I put the phone face down again and sat there for a while with that information sitting in my chest like something that hadn't fully landed yet. My wife answered on the second ring. "I was just about to call you," she said. "How is he? They're still running tests. Where are you?" A pause, small but there. I had to stop. "I'm not far." I looked at the bank account. Another pause. This one longer. "Thomas." She only used my name like that when something was serious. I had always thought of it as the voice she used when she cared. I was relearning what it meant in real time. "You need to tell me what that wire transfer is," I said. I kept my voice low because my granddaughter was 6 feet away and because I am 63 years old and I learned a long time ago that raising your voice mostly just uses up energy you need for other things. I was going to explain everything. I needed to do this before I lost my nerve. "Do what?" She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she said, "I haven't been happy for a long time, Thomas. You know that. You've known it." I didn't know it. Or maybe I had and had decided the word happy was too simple to apply to a 31-year marriage the way you'd apply it to a sandwich or a sunny afternoon. I had thought we were something more complicated and more durable than happy. "That money is both of ours," I said. "I'll pay back my half of what I took." I spoke to a lawyer. I know my rights. The word lawyer sat there between us on the phone. "Our son," I said. "Our son is in a hospital bed right now. He was in this bed when you were moving money." Silence. I didn't plan the timing, she said. I'm sorry about that. I truly am. But I couldn't. I had to go. I've been trying to find the right moment for 2 years, and there is no right moment, Thomas. There just isn't. Where are you going? She told me. I won't say where. It doesn't matter where. What matters is that she said we, and I understood that there was a person I didn't know, or maybe I did know him, and simply hadn't understood what I was seeing, and that she had been planning this for longer than she was telling me. Your granddaughter is asleep in the chair next to me, I said. She called 911 by herself today. She's 8 years old, and she called 911 by herself. My wife said she was sorry. She sounded like she meant it. I think she probably did mean it. There are people who can mean something and do the opposite thing anyway. And I had spent 31 years not knowing my wife was one of them. I told her I had to go. I hung up. My daughter-in-law arrived 40 minutes later. She came through the door and went straight to the bed and put both hands on the rail and looked at my son's face for a long moment before she turned to me. I stood up so she could have the chair. My granddaughter woke up when her mother came in and climbed into her arms without saying anything, just wrapped herself there. My daughter-in-law held her with one arm and reached out and squeezed my hand with the other. Thank you for being here, she said. I told her there was nowhere else I would have been. I didn't tell her about the money yet. She had enough to hold right now. We all did. I drove home that night along roads I'd driven so many times, the turns happened without thought. The house was dark when I got there. Her car was gone. Most of her things in the closet were gone. The kind of gone that takes planning, not a suitcase grabbed in a hurry, but careful, organized removal. Things selected and packed over days or weeks while I had been watching football in the living room or sleeping 8 feet away. I sat down at the kitchen table and didn't turn on the lights. I am not a man who falls apart easily. I built things for a living. You learn to look at damage clearly and figure out what's structural and what isn't. This was structural. I understood that. What I couldn't quite get straight in my mind was the mathematics of it, that she had been somewhere else in her head for 2 years, while I had been here, in this house, thinking we were retired people with a good life and a granddaughter who played soccer on Saturday mornings and a son who burned the chicken every Sunday. I had been living in one version of our marriage, while she had been living in a different one, and neither of us had told the other. Although I suppose she had told me, in the end, just not with words. I called my brother the next morning. He's 70, retired, was a CPA for 35 years before he handed his practice to his daughter. He was the first call I made because he would be practical about it before he was emotional about it, and I needed that sequence. He listened without interrupting, which is something most people can't do. When I finished, he said, "Did she take anything from the joint checking?" "No, just savings." "Okay. You need to call the bank this morning before anything else moves. Tell them you're disputing the wire as unauthorized. You may not get it all back, but you need to start the clock." She had access to the account. She had legal access. Whether the transfer constitutes marital waste or dissipation of assets is a different question. That's for a divorce attorney. But call the bank first. He paused. "How's your son?" "Stable. They're calling it a significant arrhythmia. He's going to need a procedure next week." "And you're all right?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "I'm clear-headed," I said. "I don't know if that's the same thing." He said that was probably the best anyone could hope for on a Wednesday morning under these circumstances. The bank conversation was long and careful, and the woman I spoke to was professional and walked me through the dispute process and flagged the account for review. She told me to expect 3 to 5 business days. She also told me, when I pressed her gently, that the transfers had been initiated from a device that had never previously accessed the account online, a phone I didn't recognize. A second phone, something she'd bought without my knowing. When you've been married 31 years, you think you know all the logistics of a person, where they keep things, what they do on Tuesday afternoons, whether they're the kind of person who would buy a second phone to plan an exit they'd been rehearsing for 2 years. You think you know. I called an attorney that afternoon. His name was recommended to me by a friend who'd been through his own divorce 8 years back and described the man as methodical and fair. Those were the 2 words I wanted. He told me that the transfers, given the circumstances, the amounts, the timing, the destination account, were likely to be characterized as dissipation. He told me that in our state, marital assets are divided equitably, and that equitable takes behavior into account. He told me to stop all automatic payments to any shared accounts by end of day and to document everything I could about joint assets. Does she have a lawyer already? He asked. She mentioned one. I don't know who. All right. From this point forward, any contact she initiates should be brief and non-committal. If she wants to discuss terms, she does it through counsel. I asked him about the timeline. He said these things take the time they take, and that trying to rush them usually cost more than it saved. He said that the cleaner I kept my own conduct, the better positioned I'd be. He said the financial documentation would likely work strongly in my favor given the circumstances of the withdrawal. I thanked him and wrote the retainer check and drove to the hospital to sit with my son. My son was awake that afternoon. He looked pale and smaller somehow, not smaller than he was, but smaller than I think of him, which is not fair to him and not accurate. He has his mother's coloring and my build, and a way of looking at things directly that I have always respected. He asked where his mother was. I had decided on the way over how to answer this. I told him that she and I were going through something, and that right now the only thing that mattered was getting him healthy. He looked at me for a long moment with eyes that understood more than I'd said. She's not coming, he said. Not a question. You focus on next week, I said. Your procedure, your recovery, your daughter needs her father back on that soccer field. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, Did she take money? I didn't answer. He nodded slowly. Dad, he said, I'm sorry. I told him he had absolutely nothing to be sorry for, and I meant it completely. My sister-in-law, called me 4 days later. My wife's younger sister, who I had known since she was 19 years old and who had been at our wedding and every Christmas and every Thanksgiving in between. She called from a number I'd seen on my phone 100 times before, and I answered without thinking. She said, I heard you talk to an attorney. How did you hear that? She told me. Thomas, I want you to know. Did you know she was planning this? The pause lasted exactly long enough to answer the question before she spoke. She asked me not to say anything. I told her she needed to tell you herself. How long? She told me she first told me about 6 months ago. But I think it had been going on longer. I didn't know about the money. I want you to be clear on that. I didn't know about the money. I believe the second part. I was less certain about the first. 6 months of silence is not a small thing. 6 months of Sundays and holidays and phone calls where she had looked at me and known what was coming and said nothing. I need you to understand something, I said. If your attorney contacts mine and your name comes up in discovery as someone with prior knowledge of asset transfers, that becomes a legal matter. I'm telling you this as someone who has known you for a long time, not as a threat. She was quiet. I hope he pulls through okay, she said, meaning my son. Thank you. I hung up and sat with the particular grief of learning that betrayal travels in groups. It rarely arrives alone. There is usually someone standing just behind it who saw it coming and said nothing. My son had his procedure 10 days after he was admitted. A catheter ablation, they go in and correct the electrical pathway that was causing the arrhythmia. The cardiologist explained it the night before with a diagram on a whiteboard in a way that made it sound precise and manageable. My son listened and asked good questions. My daughter-in-law held his hand and asked the questions he didn't think of. My granddaughter was not there that night. She was home with a neighbor who had 3 children and a gentle house. I had asked the neighbor myself. The procedure was 4 hours. I sat in the waiting room with my daughter-in-law, and we didn't talk much, and I was grateful for that. She is a woman who understands that silence between people who trust each other is not empty. The cardiologist came out and said it had gone well. The pathway was corrected. They would keep him overnight and monitor him, and barring anything unexpected, he would go home the following day. My daughter-in-law put her face in her hands. I put my hand on her back. On the drive home that night, I stopped at a gas station and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before going in. Not because I needed to compose myself, more because I needed to locate myself to take a slow count of what I had and what I'd lost and what was still standing. My son was going to be all right. That was the first thing. The second thing was that I was 63 years old and I was starting over in a way I had not planned for and had not wanted and could not change. The house was mine. I'd owned it before the marriage and the attorney confirmed it was protected. The retirement accounts were joint, but the documentation of the wire transfers had moved well, and my attorney had filed for a temporary restraining order on further dissipation of assets. She could not touch the retirement funds, pending the divorce proceedings. The third thing, and this took me longer to find, was that I was not destroyed by this. Diminished, yes. Reoriented, absolutely. But not destroyed. I had built too many things to believe that damage was the same as collapse. The divorce proceedings took 7 months. I will not walk through all of them because most of it was paperwork and waiting and brief phone calls with my attorney about what the other side's attorney had said. That is most of what divorce is: paperwork and waiting. The dramatic moments people imagine are actually pretty short. The rest is administrative. The wire transfers were ruled dissipation of marital assets. She was required to repay the amounts to the joint estate before division. Her attorney argued for a different framing, and my attorney provided documentation that made that argument difficult to sustain. The bank records, the timestamps, the fact that I was documented as being at the hospital when the transfers occurred, it was all there. In writing, orderly. She kept certain things she had brought into the marriage. I kept the house. The retirement accounts were divided, but the court took the dissipation into account, and my share reflected that. I am not going to tell you she got what she deserved in some cinematic sense. That is not how these things resolve. What I will tell you is that the outcome was fair, and I have been a contractor long enough to know that fair is not guaranteed and should not be taken lightly. She did not reach out to me during the proceedings, beyond what the attorneys required. I did not reach out to her. There was a moment, sometime around month 4, when I picked up my phone and started to write something, not angry, just a question, something that had been sitting in my chest since that phone call in the hospital. I didn't send it. My attorney had said keep contact minimal, and I had agreed to do that, and I am a man who keeps his agreements. My son came to help me reorganize the house on a Saturday in November, about 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. He still tired more easily than he used to. The procedure had gone well, but recovery had its own pace, and I told him he didn't have to do much, just keep me company. We moved a few pieces of furniture. We took down some things from shelves and decided together what to keep and what to donate. My son was methodical about it in a way that reminded me of how he had always been careful, thoughtful, not sentimental in the careless way, but in the considered way. My granddaughter was there too. She had organized the things I was donating into boxes with labels she'd written herself. Her handwriting is enormous and leans hard to the right. She had written donate on one box and keep on another, and grandpa's on a third one without being asked. At one point, she came and stood next to me while I was looking at the shelves in the living room. She looked at the shelves and then at me. "Grandpa," she said. "Yeah. Is it going to be weird now? Here?" I thought about that. I looked around the room, the furniture I'd had for 20 years, the windows that faced the backyard I'd built the deck off of, the bookshelves I'd installed myself with a level and a measuring tape on a Sunday a long time ago. "No," I said, "it's going to be different. Different isn't the same as weird." She considered this with the seriousness she applies to most things. "Okay," she said. Then she went back to her boxes. My son had been listening. He didn't say anything. He handed me the next thing from the shelf, and I looked at it and put it in the right box, and we kept going. I am writing this in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning in February. The light comes in through the east window at this hour in a way that has always been my favorite thing about the house. I noticed it the first time I walked through when I was 36 years old and buying the place on my own, and I noticed it every morning for years afterward, and then I suppose I stopped noticing it for a long time. I am noticing it again. I turned 64 in January. My son brought over a lemon cake because I have always preferred lemon to chocolate, and he knows this. My granddaughter had decorated it with blue frosting and had spelled out my name in yellow letters that were slightly too large to all fit, so the last two ran off the edge. My son said they could fix it. I said absolutely not. I have learned some things in the past year that I did not know before. I have learned that you can be blindsided by someone you trusted completely, and that this does not mean you were stupid or careless. It means you were trusting, which is not a flaw. I have learned that the children, the ones who were in the middle of it, who asked questions in hospital rooms and called 911 at 8 years old, those children are resilient in ways that will surprise you, and that your job is to be the thing that stays stable while they find their footing. I have learned that my brother gives better advice than almost anyone I know, and that I should have been calling him more often for the past decade. I have learned that 63 is not old. I knew this intellectually before. I know it differently now. The divorce took something from me. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. 31 years is not a small thing to unwind, even when the unwinding is necessary, even when the outcome is fair. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from revising your entire understanding of a long period of your life. I have been doing that revision slowly, without rushing it. But here is what did not happen. I did not stop functioning. I did not retreat from my son and his family. I did not become a bitter man sitting in a dark house, cataloging his grievances. There is nothing useful in that, and I did not want it, and I did not become it. The deck in the backyard needs some boards replaced before spring. I have been looking at it from the kitchen window and making my list. I built it myself 20 years ago, and it has held up well, but nothing holds up forever without maintenance. You have to look at it honestly and see what's worn and fix what needs fixing before it becomes something worse. I know how to do that. I have always known how to do that. My granddaughter has a soccer game this Saturday. I will be there with a folding chair and a thermos of coffee, and I will watch her run across the field, and I will know exactly where I am and exactly why it matters. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is, in fact, everything.